Dr. Paul E. Michelson has been a member of the faculty since 1974. He was a 3-time Fulbright Fellow in Romania. His areas of interest and expertise include historiography, Romanian history, and political development in the 19th to 21st centuries, totalitarianism and post-totalitarian societies, the history of Venice, and the work, above all, I think, just take center stage, I guess, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. He has been president of the Society for Romanian Studies from 2006 to 2009, secretary of the Conference on Faith and History, and a member of the National Board of the Southeast European Studies Association. Currently serves as the secretary of the Society for Romanian Studies and is a member of the editorial boards of 13 journals. His book, Romanian Politics, 1859 to 1871, From Prince Cuza to Prince Carol, was selected by Choice magazine as an outstanding academic book for 1998 and was awarded the 2000 Balcescu Prize for History by the Romanian Academy. He was a co-author of A History of Romania and a lead contributor to Richard Frucht's Encyclopedia of East Europe, which was a Choice magazine outstanding academic book for 2000. He has published over 150 articles. In 1997, Dr. Michelson was the recipient of the Huntington College Centennial Medallion. He has also been Huntington University faculty lecturer 4 times, 1981, 89, 2009, and 2013. So I think it's safe to say that Professor Michelson has a long-standing and intense relationship with Romania, and we're pleased to hear him talk about C.S. Lewis's work, The Abolition of Man, in retrospect.
Mulțumesc. Mă bucur să fii aici ca un reprezentant al Agora Christi din Iași și societatea lor despre C.S. Lewis și Kindred Spirits, care recomand. Anul viitor o să fie al 10-lea aniversar de această societate și cu o conferință octombrie sau noiembrie în Iași. Înainte de toate vreau să întreb cine aici a citit cartea lui C.S. Lewis, Abolirea omului? Okay, good. Well, bad too. Pentru că înseamnă că nu e de prisos care fac un fel de sumar de ideile principale din cartea menționată. Okay, about 80 years ago, in February of 1943, C.S. Lewis gave the Riddell Memorial Lectures at King's College, University of Durham, under the title, The Abolition of Man. The purpose of the Riddell Lectures, established in 1928, was to explore the relationship between religion and contemporary thought. Seems to me that's what we're doing here, right? And it seems to me that our meeting today is one more chapter in the relationship between religion and contemporary thought. Lewis's interest and concern in this topic was sparked by 2 factors. The first was the reaction to his initial series of BBC lectures in 1941, dealing with what he called the law of human nature. And secondly, the fact that a number of speakers and papers presented at the Oxford Socratic Club, which had been founded by Stella Aldwinkle, Lewis, and others in December of 1941, to promote discussion and debate between Christians, atheists, and agnostics. Quite a few of the people questioned the very existence of an objective moral law. The invitation from Durham provided Lewis with a welcome occasion to concentrate his fire on this particular problem. They were published in 1943 as The Abolition of Man. At the same time, Lewis was well along with the writing of the 3rd volume of his science fiction trilogy, published in 1945 but completed by 1943, That Hideous Strength. Now, why mention a science fiction book in this august context? Um, Very simply, in a letter that Lewis wrote to a correspondent in 1954, the plot of that hideous strength involved a triple conflict, I'm quoting, grace against nature, nature against anti-nature, defined by Lewis as modern industrialism, scientism, and totalitarian politics, end quote. And in the preface to that hideous strength, Lewis explicitly ties it to the abolition of man, saying that, quote, his fictional work had behind it a serious point which I have tried to make in my abolition of man. So if you would rather read fiction than philosophy, you could read that hideous strength and get the same message with one drawback. The abolition of man is less than 200 pages. That hideous strength is over 400 pages, but you can take your choice. In 1955, Lewis wrote, "The Abolition of Man is almost my favorite among my books, but in general has almost been totally ignored by the public." I'll mention what seemed to me to be a few reasons for that. The first is, although it's short, it's difficult. I think maybe the third or fourth reading, a lot of things begin to sink in, but don't let that discourage you. Secondly, it has a pretty user-unfriendly subtitle. Here's the subtitle of the book: Reflections on Education with Special Reference to the Teaching of English in the Upper Forms of Schools. I don't think this is a subtitle that would grab the attention of most people. If it were a television program, you'd switch to another station. Secondly, the first part of chapter 1 seems almost designed to discourage readers. Quote, "I doubt whether we are sufficiently attentive to the importance of elementary textbooks." Really? Who wants to read here about elementary school textbooks? Anyone? No? I would interject here that the election of governor in the state of Virginia last year hinged around elementary school textbooks, in which people were arguing that the so-called progressives, I don't call them progressives, I think they're regressives, since they want to go back to 19th century and maybe early 20th century ideas, promoted in schools ideas which parents increasingly found objectionable, and the candidate who represented these points of view won, surprisingly enough. So there are some people interested in elementary school textbooks. I don't know whether this is happening in Romania or should happen. Yes? Okay. All right. So when Lewis moves away from textbooks, third reason, he plunges into classical philosophy, defense of ethical absolutes, subjects which I think are rather heavy sledding for most people. So why should we bother with this book? I hope at the end of my remarks you'll agree with me that this is indeed a book worth reading and rereading. You also might be encouraged to know that the main themes of the abolition of man are outlined quite succinctly and clearly in the titles of the 3 lectures. These were Men Without Chests, The Way, and the Abolition of Man. So in one sense, you could just read the chapter titles and then you wouldn't have to read the rest of the book. This is something that might appeal, again, to some audiences today which have increasingly short-term memories or attention spans, but I'm assuming that's not true of us here, since we've already sat through an hour of lecture, another hour here, several hours later. So I commend you for being here. All right, so what's this all about then? It seems wise then for me to begin with a short course on these 3 chapters. We'll go pretty quickly, but maybe we'll have some time for you to ask for clarification if you wish. Chapter 1, Men Without Chess. Lewis writes, quote, "We were told it all long ago by Plato." Incidentally, I found a number of Platonic elements in your lecture, which I think were interesting and certainly would have interested Lewis. "Reason in man must rule appetites by means of the spirited element. The head," that's the rational element, "rules the belly," that's the emotional element, the animal element, if you wish, by means of this spirited element, which is the organization of trained habits into stable sentiments, the indispensable liaison officers between cerebral man and visceral man. Some of us are more visceral, some of us are more cerebral, and Lewis is arguing that this third element, what he called the sentiments, function as a kind of referee and so on, and this is a well-established classical analysis. "It may even be said that by this middle element, man is man, for by his intellect he is mere spirit, and by his appetite mere animal." So what is man? What is, I guess today we would prefer to say, what is a person? It is this moderating spiritual element between our heads and our stomachs, our hearts. One wonders if Plato or Lewis anticipated that some modern people would be both cerebral and visceral and not even recognize the contradiction between them. One thinks of the uber-rationalist Carl Sagan, who advocated skeptical scientific inquiry and naturalism, ridiculed the irrationality of Christians, and at the same time dabbled in New Age under the influence of his third wife. Maybe that's a warning to gentlemen here. If you have a wife, stick with one. You might be less confused. The thrust of modern education, Lewis argues in this book, quote, "is to produce what may be called men without chess." See where this is going? We have heads, we have stomachs, but we're beginning to be people without chess. "People who believe, quote, all sentences containing a predicate of value are statements about the emotional state of the speaker and are therefore unimportant." In short, students are taught that there are no objective values, what Lewis called the Tao, or the way, the objective order, or the existence of an objective order. The result, Lewis writes, is that, quote, "we continue to clamor for those very qualities we are rendering impossible. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chess and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst." This was, of course, written during World War II. Now, the second lecture is entitled "The Way," or what Lewis calls the Tao, T-A-O. He argues, quote, "the practical result of education in the 20th century must be the destruction of the society which accepts it." Now we're getting closer to home again. The authors of a book that he refers to in the Abolition of Man claims to have shown by the very act of writing their book that there must be some other values about which they are not subjective at all. So these guys attack values as all subjective, and Lewis says, how is it then that they can write a book arguing if argumentation and so on is merely an expression of our emotions or subjective approaches? There must be some other values about which they're not subjective at all. Their skepticism about values is on the surface. It is for use on other people's values. About the values current in their own group, they are not nearly skeptical enough. And I think, again, the application of this to our own times is quite clear. People talk about subjectivity, but can you have political correctness without having some assumed values? But these, of course, don't exist according to modern people's way of thinking. Lewis argues that objective values were previously recognized not only in modern times, it's only in modern times that people have come to deny them. But this denial is self-refuting, since they appeal to argument and rationality in the process of attacking argument and rationality. This is, by the way, an argument that Lewis later used against materialism and naturalism as a whole in his book, Miracles. In Mere Christianity, Lewis puts it this way: if no set of moral values were truer or better than any other, there would be no sense in preferring civilized morality to savage morality, or Christian morality to Nazi morality. In fact, of course, we all do believe that some moralities are better than others. The moment you say one set of moral ideas can be better than another, you are in fact measuring them both by a standard. Admitting that there is such a thing as a real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get nearer to the real right than others. In his third and final lecture, The Abolition of Man, Lewis deals with the remaining, I skipped one paragraph, which is important. Actually, two paragraphs. He goes on then to point out in The Abolition of Man to escape from this impasse by appeals to facts or to science. Today we call this following the science, which means your arguments as a Christian or whatever are not science and therefore untenable, or to provide a new morality, ignores, Lewis says, the is-ought problem, the reality that from propositions of fact, no practical conclusion can ever be drawn. If I say to you, here's a starving person, that doesn't tell us what we ought to do about it, which could range from crossing to the other side of the street so we don't see this person, to perhaps stealing the person's clothing and so on, since he's obviously helpless, to feeding the person. But those conclusions come from someplace else, Lewis argues, from the Tao, from the existence of values. And of course, if we appeal to instinct or reason or natural selection, which Lewis discusses as other options, they don't tell us why we ought to obey them. Knowing that something is instinctively so doesn't tell us why we ought to, anything about the ought. And secondly, they don't tell us what to do when these things come in conflict with each other, right? What if you have an instinct to self-preservation and an instinct that a mother might have to protect her children? Which comes first? We wouldn't know from pure materialism or naturalism. The attempt to manufacture a chest or a Tao in modern times to create a new morality, a secular morality or whatever, is thus a failure. Alistair McIntyre has shown how the Enlightenment project of justifying morality, 1984 book, decisively failed. The attempted secularization of morality by the Enlightenment has led to a situation in which, I'm quoting McIntyre, moral judgments lose any clear status and sentences which express them lose any undebatable meaning. According to McIntyre, this leads to something called emotivism, which would be a nice subject for another paper, colloquially known as the hooray, boo theory, derived in literature from Ogden and Richards, with whom Lewis had frequent debates, and from logical positivism, as elaborated in the 1930s by A.J. Ayer. Lewis concludes, the Tao is, quote, not one among a series of possible systems of value. It is the sole source of all value judgments. If rejected, all value is rejected. If any value is retained, then the Tao is retained. Now, in the third and final lecture, he deals then with the question of, or final solution, rejecting the concept of all value altogether. This argument is, having mastered our environment, let us now master ourselves and choose our own destiny. Quoting Lewis again, man's conquest of nature, if the dreams of some scientific planners are realized, means the rule of a few hundred over billions and billions of others. Each new power won by man is power over man as well. The final stage comes when man, by eugenics, prenatal conditioning, education, and propaganda, based on a perfect applied psychology, so we can all give a resounding boo to psychology. Okay, maybe not. Human nature will be the last part of nature to surrender to man. This may be called the Nietzschean or the B.F. Skinner solution. In the end, we will get an unprecedented situation, Lewis argues, a race of conditioners who really can cut out all posterity in what shape they please, because they are unencumbered by the Tao, and values will be just mere natural phenomena. There might be some residual survivals of the Tao, may be good for the lower classes, but certainly not applying to anyone else. Man's conquest of nature turns out to be nature's conquest of man and results in the abolition of man, hence the title of the book. Okay, about 7 minutes here. Abolition of Man in retrospect. What does this have to do with us? The Oxford philosopher J.R. Lucas, reviewing Lewis's book in 1995, wrote, quote, the intervening 50 years have largely vindicated Lewis. His general attack on moral relativism, contemporary isms which purported to replace traditional objective morality, hardline scientific anti-humanism, in all of these Lewis was right and has been vindicated by events. We have come to realize in our subsequent troubles that he told us so, and that what he told us was indeed true. Now, I want to close with some examples which I think illustrate a number of Lewis's points and kind of the relevance that this might have today. Start with hubris. An excellent example of modern hubris is software billionaire Bill Gates, who proclaimed in an interview, quote, all the neurons in the brain that make up perceptions and emotions operate in binary fashion. We can replicate someday all of that on a machine. And compare this with Lewis' comments in Miracles. Reason is something more than cerebral biochemistry. Lewis on one side, Bill Gates on the other. As for religion, Mr. Gates is equally forthright. Quote, I love this quote, just in terms of allocation of time resources, religion is not very efficient. There's a lot more I could be doing on a Sunday morning. Okay, good luck with that. Secondly, the behaviorist psychologist B.F. Skinner, who wrote in his book Beyond Freedom and Dignity, we need to make vast changes in human behavior. What we need is a technology of behavior. We could solve our problems quickly enough if we could adjust the growth of world's population as precisely as we adjust the course of a spaceship or improving agriculture. But a behavioral technology comparable in power and precision is lacking, and those who do not find the possibility ridiculous are more likely to be frightened by it than reassured. Skinner later commented directly on Lewis's work, quote, C.S. Lewis put it quite bluntly, man is being abolished. But instead of being alarmed, Skinner was delighted. Quote, what is being abolished is autonomous man, the man defended by the literatures of freedom and dignity. His abolition has been long overdue. So he's saying, great, if what Lewis is predicting happens, so much the better. His autonomous man is a device used to explain what we cannot explain in any other way. He is constructed from our ignorance, and our understanding increases, the very stuff of which he is composed will vanish. To man as man, we readily say, good riddance, end quote from Skinner. A third argument has to do with climate change, that climate change will require radical changes in politics and democracy itself. So in a book called Climate Change Challenge and the Failure of Democracy, here's what a number of reviewers had to say. Professor at Princeton, I won't mention his name to avoid incriminating the guilty. Warnings of a pending environmental crisis are no longer the prerogative of solitary prophets. They now reflect the consensus of the scientific establishment. But how radical a change in established political thinking do they require of us? This volume makes a powerful case for the view that taking environmental crisis seriously implies a radical critique of democracy itself and a willingness to accept government by qualified experts rather than popular election, end quote. And there's another quote I have here, but time doesn't permit me to give it. A fourth example is what's happening in social media, which is becoming more and more militant, I think, in suppressing any opinion that differs from theirs. The CEO of Babylon Bee, anyone here know the Babylon Bee? Aha, good. Look it up, it's hilarious. Said in August, I think it's just the natural progression of where they're taking things. They've decided they know what's good and what's right and what's true, and they're redefining what's true. Other social media then enforce this in terms of service agreements, which allow them to silence such thinking. Another points to the immense power of Google. Quote, Google is far more than any other single entity determines what humanity thinks is true about current events and knowledge in general. The platform continues to filter and refine its ideology through artificial intelligence, brainwashing most of the globe with a subtlety never seen in history, end quote. And lastly, this month in California, the governor signed a law, AB 2223, for those of you taking notes, which permits the killing of children during all 9 months before birth and decriminalizes actions which lead to newborn deaths for the first month after birth, called perinatal deaths, which many consider a form of infanticide. The defender of the bill, of course, argued this is a distortion, but it's curious to me how many distortions of this sort turn into realities after they're adopted. Lewis once remarked, it is a terrible thing to live in a post-civilized world. It was as if he knew in 1943 what we would have to cope with in 2022. Alan Jacobs called the Abolition of Man, quote, the most profound of Lewis's cultural critiques, end quote. I hope you will agree with Jacobs that it's not only a profound critique, but one that has not lost its relevance after nearly 80 years, unfortunately. Thank you for your attention.
Avem acum cam 5 minute pentru întrebări. În timp ce luăm întrebări, ar fi bine să stabilim conexiunea cu Zoom, pentru că vorbitoarea următoare este deja? Ok, foarte bine. Atunci, dacă aveți o întrebare, sunteți invitați să ridicați mâna.
Stupefied everybody into silence. Okay.
Aș da prioritate altora, dar dacă nu... o pun în română sau în engleză? In English? Da? Mulțumim tare mult pentru prezentare și pentru că ați adus în atenție un așa de mare autor creștin ca și C.S. Lewis. În lucrarea The Abolition of Man, așa cum ați prezentat, el abordează problematica valorilor în sistemul educațional. Dumneavoastră aveți privilegiul de avea, să zic, câte un picior în mai multe lumi. Mă refer acum în principal la Statele Unite și România. Având o experiență în sistemul educațional și în Statele Unite și în România, dacă C.S. Lewis ar fi să adreseze câteva cuvinte în legătură cu sistemul educațional din Statele Unite și din România și problematica valorilor în educație, care ar fi unul dintre lucrurile pe care le-ați recomanda în mod pozitiv sau unul pe care l-ați semnala ca pericol în ceea ce România ar putea să învețe de la Statele Unite? O greșeală sau don't or do? O greșeală sau un sfat pe care România l-ar putea lua în ceea ce înseamnă modul în care Statele Unite a abordat problema valorilor în educație?
Da. De nefericire sunt mulți care pleacă de aici în statele și în EU și așa mai departe să se facă doctorate, chestii în acest gen și îmi pare rău că absorbă în același timp această cultură politică și filozofică profund greșit. Ce cred ar fi spus Lewis, este timp pentru noi care ținem la valorile obiective să mergem și lucrăm împreună. Pentru că sunt multe surse diverse în care poate putem găsi niște aliați. Mi se pare în România, totuși, probabil sentimentul este că sunt valori obiective și sunt anumite chestii care, de fapt, sunt paradoxal. Deci, la noi, adică aici, așa zis Jesus film, nu știu cum se spune în românește, a fost văzut peste tot și în școli și așa mai departe. Același chestie în Rusia, care i-au primit cu mare entuziasm acest film, care este o prezentare de Evanghelie, în sfârșit, și în timp ce la noi, dacă ar fi rolat într-o școală publică, cei care propune să fie cel puțin amendați, știi? Deci avem libertate de religie, dar a devenit, de fapt, un fel de libertate împotriva religiei.
Deci, țara tuturor libertăților nu mai este chiar așa cum ne imaginam unul dintre noi.
Da, pentru că în anumite sectori nu trebuie totuși supra exagerat, pentru că cine sunt acei care avea această limba care au prevenit Lewis, poate 15-20%, dar, pe de altă parte, ei comanda universități, presa, mass media și așa mai departe, deci au o influență foarte din afară de proporție lor. Dar în ce mai mult, cred că sunt realizat la noi, cei lumea care putem zice conservator, din acest punct de vedere filozofic, sunt conștient că trebuie să lucreze cu ceilalți Deci acum sunt, de fapt, grupuri în care sunt asociați romano-catolici, evrei, evanghelici, să promovează libertatea religioasă în forma originală și așa mai departe. Deci, probabil asta ar fi cel mai important. Lewis, după al doilea război mondial, a fost implicat în anumite activități în care să lucreze împreună oameni cu au același filosofie tradițională. Mere creștinismul pur și simplu a fost o încercare totuși să reunește toate forțele religioase creștine care au la bază catolici, ortodoxi, evanghelici și așa mai departe. Deci, probabil asta este cea mai important lucru putem face astăzi, să se unim cu alții, chiar dacă nu suntem de acord cu ei 99%, dar mai bine să luptăm împotriva cei care suntem de acord, dezacord 90%.
Da, mulțumesc tare mult. Mulțumesc frumos.
Mulțumim!